Stone tools on the seafloor. There is so much potential underwater for great archaeological discoveries from the North Pole to the South Pole. One of the coolest recent archaeological discoveries that took place underwater was when researchers discovered a collection of stone tools on the seafloor that date back 7,000 years. This happened along Australia's continental shelf, and it was the first discovery of its kind. According to Smithsonian Magazine, after the last ice age, the glaciers melted and seawater inundated a third of the habitable land in Australia. Much of this underwater land is hiding archaeological secrets. The research team found 269 stone artifacts under roughly 8 feet of water. These were discovered at the Cape Brugheris Channel, and it appears that the tools were used for simple activities like cutting, hammering, and scraping. Researchers even found a grindstone that was likely used for baking bread. The tools would have belonged to the indigenous people on the continent of Australia, and it's interesting to discover that these ancient peoples had lived in parts of the country now completely submerged underwater. According to a marine geoarchaeologist from the United Kingdom's National Oceanography Centre, scientists are very interested in studying along the northern coast of Australia because the evidence there could tell scientists about how people first crossed from Southeast Asia to Australia without using boats. There was definitely a sort of land crossing, and that much we already know. But physical evidence could detail much more about the lives of the ancient indigenous Australians.
The Iron Hand. How cool would it be to have an iron hand? You could punch through brick, you could crush your enemies, and you could stick your hand directly into a fire. You'd be pretty well invincible. But then again, you wouldn't really play video games or text anyone since you wouldn't have a thumb. But that didn't matter in the 16th century, where our first archaeological discovery took place. One of the first prosthetic limbs in history was used by a fierce German mercenary knight named Gotz, and sometimes referred to as Gotz the Iron Hand. He lived in the early 1500s and was a soldier for hire. He also got hit by a cannonball in 1504 and lost his arm. To keep fighting, the clever mercenary developed the first iron hand ever. It's unclear who built this artifact, but it was definitely used by Gotz. It didn't give much of a range of motion, but he could still hold a sword with it, and he could still punch people with it. But then a few years later, the mercenary upgraded to an even better iron hand. According to the American Journal of Surgery, the second hand was able to be manipulated using his left hand. He could tighten the joints at the knuckles to allow for a tighter grip. This helped for holding a sword, holding the reins of his warhorse, and even using a quill to write with. The mercenary's prosthetic limb is kept today inside a small castle in a German town of about 1,600 people. Gotz the Iron Hand is their historical pride and joy, with the prosthetic limb even being featured on their coat of arms.
Yoda in the woods. Let's start the video with something absolutely shocking. A woman made an extremely unexpected discovery when she found a strange creature that looked a lot like Yoda from Star Wars skulking around her home. She managed to record the incident on video and post it online, and it proceeded to freak out the entire internet. The woman said in a Facebook post that the strange creature was watching a group of deer nearby her home, but that it would sometimes turn and stare straight at her. This happened in Minnesota, and there's no doubt that the creature in this video definitely resembles some kind of Yoda lookalike. Could it be an alien? Could it just be an ordinary animal? Or could it be some kind of an unidentified forest monster that nobody knows about? Unfortunately, the creature fled back into the forest and nobody has any idea what it was. It could have very well just been a cat, but the truth is that we'll probably never know. And besides, do you even want to know what the creature was? Submerged Neolithic settlement. A new submerged Neolithic settlement has been discovered in Israel, and it is truly fascinating. Among the ruins of this lost coastal settlement, researchers discovered houses, graves, skeletons, and even a well. The site is called Atlit Yam, and researchers believe it dates back from somewhere between 6900 and 6300 BC. It's also submerged beneath at least 30 feet of water. This is not a new discovery. The site was found originally in 1984 by a marine archaeologist, but because of a lack in technology, it's been difficult to study until just recently. The most recent underwater excavations have found all kinds of great things, including 7 megaliths at the center of the town arranged in a stone semicircle, kind of like Stonehenge but much smaller. These stones were arranged around a freshwater spring, which researchers say was probably the site of ancient water rituals. As for how the town got submerged in the first place, scientists say the village was abandoned abruptly when a tsunami hit the region, which was probably caused by some kind of volcanic eruption in the area of the Mediterranean. A particularly cool discovery at this site was a pair of skeletons. A woman and a child were both found, and after extensive testing, they were revealed to be the earliest known cases of tuberculosis in humans. What exactly this means for history is still a bit murky, but it's definitely one of the most fascinating underwater finds coming out of Israel.
The Labraa Woman. The Labraa Woman was the name given to the girl whose remains were discovered at the Labraa tar pits in Los Angeles. The remains were first discovered in 1914, and they turned out to be the partial skeletal remains of a woman who had died at around 25 years old, about 10,022 years ago. To date, she is still the only person who has ever been discovered inside the Labraa tar pits. You might be wondering how just one person in all of history could be found at a site like the Labraa tar pits. Well, archaeological evaluations of the woman's skeleton showed that her skull had been fractured, probably by a blow to the head, and that was likely the cause of her death. It was probably that her body was dumped into the tar pits like you might dump a corpse into a sinkhole to try and hide your crime. But considering the woman lived in North America 10,000 years ago, nobody really knows what happened that caused her body to be lost in the sticky tar of the pits.
Crop circles in California. Do aliens create crop circles? Are they truly responsible for this strange phenomenon? I mean, what other than an alien ship could come down and craft a geometrically perfect shape in a field overnight? This was the question asked when California residents woke up to a mysterious crop circle that had happened at a farm over the weekend. This was in Salinas Valley, near Monterey, and some claimed to have seen two massive explosions of light just before dawn the morning before the crop circle was discovered. The BBC originally reported the story in December, claiming that nobody had come forward to say that they were responsible for the shapes flattened into the farmer's field. It definitely looked like the work of aliens. At least it did for about a week, until the technology firm Nvidia came out and said that they had created the crop circle as a stunt. The truth of this one definitely sucks. It would have been much cooler if aliens had created the crop circle rather than a technology company. But that just goes to show that most of the time, crop circles are not that mysterious, though we all definitely wish they were. The 7 Pagodas of Mahabali Purum. Mahabali Purum is a UNESCO World Heritage Site off the coast of India. It's famous all over the world for its impressive cave temples, its ancient art, and fascinating architecture. Many of the structures here are from the 8th century AD, and the entire region is steeped in rich history, but one of the local legends says that thousands of years ago this area contained much larger temple structures. Apparently, the largest of all the temples featured 7 massive pagodas, but all of them were lost many years ago. Even some of the earliest European visitors recorded that the locals claimed that in the recent past, the copper tops of the pagodas could still be seen shining out at sea. But until recently, the story of the 7 pagodas was nothing but a myth. In 2004, myth turned into reality. After a massive tsunami devastated much of the area and water was pulled out over 1,500 feet from the shore, locals reported seeing several rows of straight stones before the water rushed back inwards. But more than that, the tsunami broke apart the shoreline and uncovered a wealth of small statues and small temples that had been previously unseen. A new archaeological survey has been conducted by the Indian Navy to see if the site truly exists, and yes, it turns out the 7 pagodas are indeed real. The survey revealed a series of buildings, platforms, and walls that could be interpreted as a larger complex. Plus, based on the style of the carvings and some coins found underwater at the site, professional archaeologists now believe that the 7 pagodas did exist but have since been destroyed. Why? Probably because of another tsunami that attacked the region in the 13th century, wiping out much of the temple complex. Marin Sal. Marin Sal is one of the most fascinating archaeological sites in the world. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site that, according to UNESCO themselves, is the first property ever to be inscribed in Saudi Arabia. The place was formerly known as Hijra, and it was an ancient city located in the center of the Old World between Asia, Arabia, and Europe. It's also the biggest conserved site of the ancient civilization of the Nabateans south of Petra in Jordan. To look at photos, this place does not even look real. It looks like 2 interdimensional doorways carved into a random chunk of rock in the middle of an alien planet. Marin Sal features at least 50 inscriptions, many cave drawings, and monumental tombs that date from between the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD. In fact, this place is a unique monument to the Nabatean civilization with 111 monumental tombs. It's also just one of the least known wonders of any ancient civilization, even though it's just across the water from Egypt. To imagine the things that happened at this site over the last 4,000 years is truly boggling. Cleopatra's Underwater Palace. Speaking of temple complexes, nothing is quite as cool as Queen Cleopatra's Palace being found off the coast of Alexandria in the north of Egypt. The city was originally founded way back in 332 BC by Alexander the Great during his conquest of Egypt. And since then, the city has had a pretty vibrant history. 300 years after Alexander's death, Queen Cleopatra took her place on the throne. She had a spectacular palace, at least so far as legend is concerned, but it magically disappeared. For the next few thousand years, nothing was known about Cleopatra's palace until the 1990s, when a French archaeologist realized that it was hidden under the water in a bay near the shoreline of the city. We now know that Cleopatra's palace is real and just as amazing as history describes. Just off the coast of Alexandria, divers have found columns and pillars, ancient paintings, the foundation of Cleopatra's palace itself, and several statues that were likely part of Cleopatra's shrine and temple. There were even 2 perfectly preserved sphinxes found beneath the water. This site is not going to be restored to its former glory anytime soon, but it's still pretty cool to think there is even more to ancient Egypt hidden under the water where we can't readily see it. Another cool fact is that the team that found the foundation of Cleopatra's palace did carbon testing and found that it dated back to 200 years before her birth, meaning that she likely inherited the now sunken palace from somebody else. Vasa Shipwreck. The Vasa Shipwreck is one of the most phenomenal pieces of nautical heritage ever salvaged. It even has its own museum. It took about 6 years for the shipwreck to be found in the Baltic Sea, where she had been sleeping for 333 years. But by autumn of 1956, the shipwreck Vasa was discovered. Then, in 1961, a serious effort was undertaken to salvage the vessel from the bottom of the ocean. It was one of the first major shipwrecks to be completely retrieved from the bottom of the sea, and it was no easy feat. But what is the Vasa, and why was it so important to be preserved? Well, the Vasa started her life as a wooden warship way back in 1628. She was built during the 30 Years' War to support King Gustav II Adolf's military campaign. The ship at the time was the largest ever in any Swedish fleet, and she was even equipped with an extra cannon deck. But the story of her sinking is pretty unfortunate. The ship departed, began to slowly sail for the open sea, got struck by a sudden wind, and sank before it even reached the ocean. Most of the crew and the passengers escaped, and this ship was very much forgotten by the end of the 18th century. Basically, the Vasa is Sweden's version of the Titanic, just a few hundred years earlier. Pufferfish Builders. We already had one bogus crop circle on the list, but it's time to bring the subject back already. Only these crop circles have been appearing in the water off the coast of Australia, not in fields. They also are not crop circles at all, but strange ringed patterns in the sand that scientists have been confused over ever since the 1990s when they were first found off the coast of Japan. It took over 2 decades for scientists to figure out who or what was making these underwater designs in the sand. The answer is going to blow your socks off. According to a marine ecologist from the University of Western Australia, the bizarre underwater patterns are actually crafted by white-spotted pufferfish. It turns out that these are not underwater crop circles at all, but are actually nests dug out of the sand by pufferfish. Scientists are not quite sure why they do it, but it's definitely them. And yes, these are the same pufferfish that are extremely poisonous. Not only can the pufferfish kill you, but it's a better artist than you as well. Unexpected alien planet. There's nothing more mysterious or unexpected than finding a new planet. 2 veteran NASA missions whose goal it is to find new planets have recently discovered a world the size of Neptune circling a young star not far from us. The new planet is being called AU Mike B, which is honestly a pretty terrible name for a planet, but in any case, it's the behavior of its star that makes the planet so interesting. Its star is younger than ours and smaller, but for some reason it sends highly irradiated flares outwards into its cosmic neighborhood. The new planet is definitely not inhabitable, as it would be like living on Earth with our sun sending extremely powerful solar flares at us every other day. Or in other words, it would be like living inside a microwave set to random. Also, the planet is 32 light-years away, a distance we probably will not get for another 1,000 years. However, this new planet and its volatile star are giving scientists a new and exciting look into the different type of solar systems located just a galactic stone throw from us. It's the first step to intergalactic exploration. The Mystery of Genghaskhan. One of the greatest archaeological mysteries of all time is the location of Genghis Khan's burial place. It's believed that when the tomb is found, it will contain a ridiculous amount of treasure, and yet nobody has ever found it. According to legend, after the great king died, he was to be buried in secret. A special army carried his body home and killed anyone they encountered to hide their route. Then, when the emperor was laid to rest in the secret location, the soldiers rode 1,000 horses over the gravesite to destroy any trace of it. They did such a good job that in 800 years since Genghis Khan died, his tomb has remained a secret. Despite dozens of expeditions, not a single trace has been located. However, there is one clue. Folklore says that Genghis Khan was buried on a peak in the Khenti Mountains. However, scholars don't know where in the mountains he would be, and it's a pretty big region. Besides this, the Mongolian people don't actually want his tomb to be found. The great Khan wanted his burial place to remain a secret, and the people respect that. It's only the foreigners who come in and try to dig up the dead.
Mysterious dinosaur bones. A mysterious new archaeological discovery of 2 dinosaur skeletons has revealed a totally new species of Nothosaur, a group of aquatic reptiles that lived in the water during the Triassic period over 200 million years ago. Because of their small heads, wide snouts, and flipper-like limbs, the bones were easily identified by paleontologists as belonging to a Nothosaur. However, the bones were found with much shorter tails than any other specimen of Nothosaur. And while this may sound super boring so far, it's actually quite interesting. According to a doctor from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the new species adapted differently than the other Nothosaurs, which means we're looking at a bridge in evolution. The newer Nothosaur, with their smaller tails, could hang out at the bottom of the sea without exerting much energy, which could have made them more reliable predators. It means that even 200 million years ago, dinosaurs were still evolving. It makes you wonder what would have happened if it hadn't been for that blasted meteorite. What would another 200 million years of evolution have turned these creatures into? Edward Scissorhands. Archaeologists have made an extremely bizarre discovery. Not only did they find a makeshift prosthetic device on a warrior buried 1,000 years ago, but the prosthetic device wasn't even what you would expect. Rather than having an iron hand like the German mercenary, this guy replaced his arm with a sword. According to the report from Archaeology magazine, wear found on the skeleton's teeth suggested that he had been adjusting the prosthetic straps using his mouth for quite some time. They also discovered calluses and bone spurs on the stump of his arm that showed exactly where he had replaced his limb with a sword. It had basically become a part of his body. Where was such a brave warrior discovered, you ask? He was found inside of a necropolis in northern Italy, among several other skeletons, a headless horse, and even some dogs. But he wasn't Italian or from the Roman Empire. The man was part of the Lombards, who were a Germanic people that ruled nearly all of the Italian peninsula between 568 and 774 after the fall of the Byzantine Empire. The Lombards were a ruthless warrior people, so it makes sense that when one of them lost a limb, he'd simply screw a sword onto the stump and continue stabbing his enemies. Scientists believe that the warrior died probably around the age of 50, but his arm being amputated likely happened much earlier in his life. Viking poop. Get ready to be grossed out. Our next story today is about Viking poop. That's right, archaeologists have discovered perhaps the best preserved piece of poop ever. It was found in New York way back in 1972, under what eventually turned into a bank. This is why the preserved Viking excrement was called the Lloyd's Bank Coprolite, or if you prefer, the Lloyd's Bank Turd. But why is such a discovery important? It seems like something that nobody would really care about, but that's not true at all. Some paleontologists have referred to the fossilized Viking coprolite as being as precious as the crown jewels. This is because the poop dates back to the 9th century, when the area of York in England was ruled by ferocious Norse kings. It's a very important time in English history. Even more interesting is what scientists were able to determine simply by doing DNA testing on the poop. They were able to extract tons of information from the fossil, including that the human who had deposited it had a diet of meat and bread. But they also had intestinal issues. The Lloyd's Bank coprolite was apparently filled with whipworm and mawworm eggs. This probably meant that the Viking warrior had stomach aches and other nasty gastrointestinal problems. If you're feeling particularly curious, you can check out the most famous poop in the world at the Jorvik Viking Center, where it sits safely inside of a glass box.
Doggerland. Doggerland is a vast stretch of water between the eastern ocean of Britain and the mainland of Europe. Looking at it now, all you can see is water. You would never guess that 10,000 years ago it was home to a massive civilization of humans. But according to Live Science, there have been recent discoveries of a fossilized forest underneath Doggerland that researchers believe is physical proof that we are close to discovering the remains of a human settlement lost beneath the ocean for 10,000 years. In fact, a researcher from the Bradford University is absolutely sure that we're close to finding an ancient ancient settlement. The most recent voyage taken to the North Sea lasted 11 days, and during that time, scientists took as many samples as they could from an area dubbed Brown Bank. Their hope is that by taking tons of DNA samples from everything they managed to dredge up during the expedition, they can get a realistic look at the types of plants and animals that would have been living there in the ancient past. This will give them a clue as to the precise location of the ancient human settlement. While no Stone Age relics have been found yet, scientists are extremely hopeful. Ancient Incan offerings. Archaeologists have made an outstanding discovery at Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. This lake, which shares a border with Bolivia and Peru, was a sacred site for the Inca civilization. It's believed that the Inca people practiced all kinds of different rituals at the lake, and just recently in 2020, archaeologists pulled a strange offering out of the water that had been down there for at least 500 years. Inside the offering, researchers found a small gold bracelet and an alpaca figurine carved out of a shell. Several different universities participated in the research at the lake, and they believe that based on the offering discovered, it had something to do with human sacrifice. What makes this so interesting is that the ancient Inca actually believed that their people originated from the lake. There was even a massive ritual complex constructed on an island inside the lake. Archaeologists believe that beneath the water is a hidden treasure hoard of artifacts. While this single offering is only a slight clue as to the specifics of the rituals performed hundreds of years ago, it is a very unique find, and with more research, it may explain why the Inca needed to throw offerings, which sometimes included their own friends and family, into the lake at all. The Amazon Sistine Chapel. Let's move on to something that has actually been discovered, not just a total mystery. Although this newest discovery in Colombia is even more mysterious than the lost tomb of Genghis Khan. A massive collection of rock art has just been found, and it's being labeled as the Sistine Chapel of the Amazon. This collection of artwork goes back 13,000 years. It was recently discovered by researchers deep in the Colombian Amazon, and it depicts a forgotten art style from the indigenous people who lived in the jungle way before Europeans even knew that there was a jungle on the other side of the ocean. How many rock paintings were found, you ask? There were tens of thousands of them, each scribbled onto a cliff face in the middle of the jungle. Because of how big it is, experts were saying it could take generations to fully study the depictions and understand what they all mean and what they say about life 13,000 years ago. And remember, this is cave artwork made by the first people who ever lived in the jungle. Ever. New sarcophagi. Everyone loves a good sarcophagus find. There's nothing better than when researchers dig up even more mummies and tombs, and while you expect this kind of thing to happen in Egypt, a brand new collection of sarcophagi has been found in Turkey, and it was completely unexpected. The discovery was made during an operation to stop illegal excavations in the area. While the authorities were using surveillance technology to find looters, they actually found a previously unknown section of the ancient city of Aphrodisias, which is in fact a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Unfortunately, in all the excitement, the illegal excavators got away, but at least the authorities discovered two sarcophagi and a mysterious altar. It's unclear who exactly was buried inside the sarcophagi, but there was a depiction of Medusa found on one of the stone coffins. Could this be the actual sarcophagus of Medusa, the scorned woman from Greek mythology with snakes for hair? Initial estimates placed the burials at least 2,300 years ago, so really anything is possible. Ancient Cambodian City. Everybody knows about Angkor Wat. It's the most impressive temple complex in the world and the biggest tourist attraction in Cambodia. It was also once the capital of the Khmer Empire, which ruled Southeast Asia from the 9th century to the 15th century. However, a new city has been discovered beneath the Cambodian jungle that for hundreds of years people thought was just a legend. As it turns out, the city of Mahendriparvata is 100% real, and it was found buried beneath thick vegetation on a Cambodian mountain very near to Angkor Wat. This city is roughly 1,000 years old. Despite this, researchers told Live Science that it had some of the best city planning of any ancient capital in history. The entire city is laid out in a grid that must have been perfectly planned before the city was actually built. It showcases an advanced style of urban development and state control, plus highly advanced water management systems. However, the city was never completely finished. The waterways were never completed, and it does not look like people lived in the place for very long. It was eventually lost to the jungle and reclaimed by nature.
The Kufu Ship. The Kufu Ship is one of the most impressive Egyptian vessels ever found. It was originally discovered in 1954 inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. The vessel was also found with the famous Egyptian pharaoh himself, whom the Great Pyramid was built for. The wooden ship was constructed 4,600 years ago, and so well designed that it could actually still set sail if launched back onto the Nile River even today. The exact purpose of the boat is still a bit of a mystery, But one of the prevailing theories is that it was placed inside of Khufu's burial chamber so that he could sail across the heavens after death to be with the sun god Ra. The ship was found under a stone wall on the southern side of the Great Pyramid, and it took over a decade for experts to put together all 1,224 individual pieces of the giant boat. It's now sitting inside a specially designed museum just outside the pyramid. As for Khufu, he was the second pharaoh of the 4th dynasty. He ruled Egypt over 2,500 years before Jesus was born. But other than commissioning the Great Pyramid of Giza to be built, there's little else known about him. Prehistoric Bongs. This next one is for the stoners out there. Anyone who thinks bongs are a modern device is absolutely wrong. Archaeologists actually discovered bongs crafted of solid gold that were used by the ancient Scythians almost 2,500 years ago for cannabis. The discovery was made by archaeologists in southern Russia, and they found over 7 pounds of gold artifacts from the time of the Scythians, who were a nomadic people that ruled much of Central Asia back in the time that Khufu was ruling Egypt. The gold artifacts included jewelry, cups, and of course, the bongs. But not only were they used for smoking ancient marijuana, they were also used for opium. It turns out that even the most ancient of civilizations had a bit of a problem with drugs. Greek historians claim that the Scythians used the gold vessels to brew an opium concoction, which they may have drank before smoking the cannabis. It's unclear whether these substances were used for ritual purposes or just for recreation. However, scientists are positive that they used both substances at the same time. These must have been some serious people if they needed to smoke cannabis after opium just to get their rocks off. Lost City of Tana. Yet another lost city has been found by archaeologists in Greece. It seems that there's no end to ancient cities spread across the Mediterranean. This is the lost city of Tana, and it was likely founded 3,000 years ago by Trojan prisoners after their devastating defeat in the Trojan War. You know, the one where they were defeated by Brad Pitt and an enormous wooden horse? It's likely that the survivors of the Trojan War fled to the south of Greece, where they constructed a small village. The search for this lost city began in 1984, when an archaeologist discovered a sarcophagus near the small village of Chiliomodi, just slightly south of Athens. After the first sarcophagus was found, a huge archaeological undertaking went down, but not until 2013. And it wasn't until 2018 that a graveyard was found that contained the remains of Trojan men and women. These tombs were stocked with bronze and gold jewelry, gold coins, and other valuable grave relics. This indicates that the people who had lived in the ancient city of Tana must have been pretty wealthy. But it wasn't until after the graveyard was found that the first buildings of the ancient city were discovered. The researchers finally found beams, columns, and stone floors buried under the dirt that suggests the city had once stood, but throughout the centuries had been destroyed and built over. The people who lived in Tana were likely the last of the Trojan warriors. Their city probably thrived from between 323 and 146 BC, when the Roman Empire occupied Greece and brought the entire region under imperial control.
Underwater treasure. Let's take a look at some sunken treasure. For centuries, people have suspected that the coastal waters of Albania, which have gone mostly unexplored in modern times, are a virgin hotspot for treasure and sunken ships. The coastline spans over 270 miles, touched by both the Adriatic Sea and the Ionian Sea. But because of the communist regime that ruled the Balkan state until 1990 was so brutal, anyone caught diving was to be shot on sight, no questions asked. It's no wonder that the plunder off the coast of Albania has remained untouched and unspoiled. That is, until recently. The waters are now open and looters are eager to steal all they can. Archaeologists are now in the area as well, trying to scoop up everything in sight before the looters get to it. But the issue here is that much of the wealth is only about 90 feet deep. This does not require any special equipment, and any hobo with a net can steal themselves some treasure. To give you an idea of the kind of underwater treasure we're talking about, expeditions starting in 2006 have found at least 40 shipwrecks along the coast, ranging from the 7th century BC to ships from both World War I and World War II. Many of these ships are from Roman times as well, and yes, there is definitely some treasure to be found. The biggest question is who will find it first, the treasure hunters or the archaeologists? Ancient Manoan Shipwreck. The Manoans were an ancient civilization that existed between 3650 and 1400 BC. They flourished on the Greek island of Crete during the Bronze Age and were some of the most prolific traders in the region, along with Greece herself and ancient Egypt. Now, a 4,000-year-old shipwreck has been discovered in the Mediterranean Sea near Turkey that belonged to the Manoans. According to the studies that have been going on since 2007 on this ancient shipwreck, it's the oldest ever to be found in Turkey, and that's saying something considering Turkey is one of the oldest inhabited regions on Earth. The shipwreck was likely used for trading since the entire area of Mediterranean thousands of years ago was basically just ships going back and forth with trade and war. But the researchers didn't just find a boat, they also discovered a lot of other cool stuff underwater in the region. They found over 20 submerged harbors that had been lost throughout time, probably because of rising sea levels. They also found over 400 anchors littering the seafloor that date from between the Bronze Age and the time of the Ottoman Empire. This project was carried out by 15 researchers, and they were supported by the Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey. The team included marine geophysicists, biologists, and underwater archaeologists, and even after several years of research, they have only scratched the surface of the amazing world living underwater at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea.
Spanish Stonehenge. As time goes on, we seem to find more and more Stonehenge copycats throughout the world. In 2019 alone, a severe drought caused water levels to drop, which revealed an ancient stone circle of over 100 standing rocks. But what's really incredible about this new Spanish Stonehenge is that it's dated to be at least 7,000 years old. According to NBC News, it's known as the Dolmen of Guadalperal, and it vanished in 1963 when the Spanish government constructed a reservoir to feed a hydroelectric dam. The photos of the revealed structure were snapped by NASA's Landsat 8 satellite in the middle of July, and it sparked renewed interest in the mysterious monument. Even though the stone circle was originally excavated in the 1920s by a German archaeologist, his findings were never published until the 1960s. By then, the reservoir was already planned to be flooded. For that reason, modern archaeologists have never been able to properly excavate or investigate the standing rocks, which are believed to have been part of an enclosed structure. They may also have been used as a tomb, a site for trade in ancient times, or even for religious rituals. Unfortunately, the reservoir has since filled back up with water, and it's now impossible to study the Spanish Stonehenge properly. Unusual dog burial. Animal burials are nothing new when it comes to ancient Egypt. It's now fairly well known that the ancient Egyptians mummified all kinds of animals, from dogs to baboons. We also now know that there were special cults in ancient Egypt that practiced mass sacrifice of dogs and cats. However, a new discovery made a few years ago of an unusual canine burial in a brick structure in Abydos has raised even more questions about the ancient Egyptian practices of animal burial. It all began when a pair of preserved dogs were found curled inside a large ceramic pot that dated back 3,000 years. It was the very first time that dogs have ever been found inside of burial jars. The pups were nicknamed Houdini and Chewy, as horribly inappropriate as that may be, and they even had their fur still intact. Because of the size of the dogs, researchers at the time could not understand how they were forced into the jars. What researchers could determine was that the dogs were about 5 years old when they died and were likely sacred animals in life. Because of the way they were buried, they must have been held in high regard within the community. However, scientists and Egyptologists don't know who the dogs were, why they were so important, or who they had belonged to, if they had even belonged to anyone. For those who don't know, Abydos, the location where the dogs were found, was constructed around 2750 BC and dedicated to the Second Dynasty king, Khasa Khemui. Which of these strange discoveries did you enjoy the most? Let me know what you think in the comments, and thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and come back soon for another fantastic video.